As Unitarian Universalists, so much of what we do on Sundays, we create new each Sunday. Unlike other traditions, we're not faced all that often with trying to make new meaning of the same story again and again. That is, except a few times each year, when we meet up with familiar stories and see what they mean for us now. One of those days is today. Today, as we meet once again, the Unitarian tradition of flower communion. Of course, this year, no, it is not exactly the same ritual as it has been the past 75 years. And yet, still, we look to find the meaning of this ritual, this familiar ritual that speaks to us into this moment, here and now. This is where Sean and I start our reflections as we begin our flower communion ceremony this year.
When I tell the story of Norbert Chopek's flower communion each year, most often I connect with his intention to try to help his community find that sense of community even across their differences. I mean, here we are, decades later, and even we still wrestle with that question. That question, can two walk together lest they be agreed? That way of phrasing it is actually from the Hebrew Bible. That's the prophet Micah, which means that this has been a living question in religious community for more than 2,000 years. Can two walk together lest they be agreed? Well, 97 years ago, plus 3 days, Chopek offered his Czechoslovakian congregation the flower communion as a response to their version of wrestling with these questions. Czechoslovakia, that was a country that was founded in the aftermath of the First World War. So Chopek was offering this flower communion just 5 years after the end of that war. So you have to imagine that Czechoslovakia was a country and a place, so therefore their church was wrestling with all sorts of anxieties and sense of who belongs, who doesn't belong, the questions of their identity, fear, uncertainty, still some trauma left from that time. So Chopek's ritual, it used the traditional ritual of a bread and wine communion offered in churches, but it riffed on that because a lot of his congregation was just a little too heretical for that traditional ceremony. So instead, he turned to the beauty of nature that was all around them, and he invited his congregants on a particular Sunday to come to church after having gone to the field and found a wildflower that was to them beautiful. And they needed to bring that flower with them to church that Sunday. That each person would find the flower that was beautiful to them was a symbol of our affirmation that each of us has a piece of the truth. So on their way into the church, each person, they would bring their flower, and as they came in, there was a vase on a table, and they would put their flower into that vase alongside all the other flowers, which of course was another symbol of the ways that each person was freely choosing to join into religious community that is a diverse religious community, the diversity represented by all those other flowers that were there in the vase. A free church where people freely choose to walk together across their differences. Once everyone had gathered, they'd bring the vase forward and Chopek would bless it. And then he would invite everybody to come forward again and choose a flower from the vase, any one they wanted that they thought was beautiful, except the one that they came with. Again, this free choice affirmed each person's free choice to receive the blessing offered by everyone else in this diverse community, to be open to the blessings of diversity, to feel connected rather than divided by their differences. There's a lot in this message of unity across difference that speaks to us in this moment, right? I mean, this moment where so many forces seek to divide us, to play on our fears of difference, to play on our anxieties of other. There's a lot of power to remember how we freely choose to walk together, to choose to be blessed by the differences between us, to see these differences as beauty. All of this on its own would be reason enough to celebrate Flower Communion this year. And yet, this year, I felt another connection to this story. Maybe because I spent all that time in the stories of World War II a couple of weeks ago, or maybe because freedom itself feels so tenuous these days. But this year I felt connected to the way that this ceremony came to the United States, many years after Chopek first celebrated it, right towards the end of the Second World War. Chopek's wife, Maya, she came to the US in 1940 and taught Unitarian churches in Massachusetts this ceremony. And as she did, her husband was still back in Poland. He was captured there by the Nazis, sent to a concentration camp. See, they saw his message, the message of his church, of the inherent worth and beauty of every person, as too much of a threat for him to live. Chopek was put to death in one of those concentration camps, even as his wife was offering this ceremony all across the US. 70 years later, we find ourselves in another global crisis. Uncertainty and unrest, the threat of violence and fear of the other persists. Once again, we wonder, maybe not as much in our church, but really in our country, will our differences be our undoing? In offering the Flower Communion ceremony, Chopek took a long-standing tradition and he reinterpreted it to speak into a community and a time filled with uncertainty and anxiety. And in turn, it gave his people an embodied way to remind themselves that together they could choose to meet the moment, not with fear, but with love. To meet the moment with compassion and creativity.
So it's Friday. I've just spent a couple hours combing through all of the great videos that have been submitted for Flower Communion. And I've come to a realization, which is that before this, I didn't really find Flower Communion very meaningful. You know, I'm a history buff, so I love the story of Chapek reinventing this tradition for his context. But the actual ritual piece, you know, I've led it for years now. And although I find it meaningful for how much other people find it meaningful, the actual practice to me has never felt overly impactful. I love the symbolism of being enriched by our diversity, of finding our place, of remembering that community is a give and receive, and that we don't always know the gift that we need to receive in any given moment. But the actual act of, you know, putting the flower on the altar and then receiving another one, it's never really hit me to my core. But I'll be honest, this week has changed that. It started with this knock on the door. I came downstairs to find a church member driving away, and what looked like an old salad dressing bottle had been transformed into a vase, and in it were some beautiful flowers and a little note of blessing reminding me that I'm a part of a circle and a community. And then I went with our foster kiddo and dropped off some flowers at a church member's house who lived really near me. And I sort of knew that, but I didn't really know that. I didn't put it together like in my heart until I drove over there. And then I was watching all of the videos. I mean, all of the videos. I mean, there's over 100 videos and photos of people dropping off, of receiving, of bringing their family on bike adventures. And I was moved. I was moved because maybe it's just the pandemic speaking, but there was something deeper in the symbolism this time. There was something deeper of actually getting up out of my regular life, finding a time to be intentional, to go out to give a gift of something beautiful, about how this community has taken this practice that we used to do in the sanctuary and let's take it outside. Different circles did different things. Some people organized like little rituals in the street for Flower Communion. Others divided up their lists, made deliveries, each of them finding the true depth the true meaning of this ritual, but truly saying, let's do this. Because community is worth it. Let's try it out. And it's amazing.
So it's 4 o'clock, and we asked everyone to drop their flowers off this evening, but look how many are already here.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, what a time.
This is the Foothills Unitarian Church. I'm Marla.
Oh, hi!
This is your flower. Oh, I'm supposed to be videoing
Hi! Thank you so much.
Yeah.
On this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle around to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now, it is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well.
Hey, you know how your church does a flower communion in June? Okay. Well, I wanted to make sure you got flowers this year since you're not going to church right now. So these are your flowers for the church flower communion.
Thank you.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones
What a nice surprise.
around to tend these fires.
Infinite Spirit of life, we ask thy blessing on these, thy messengers of fellowship and love. May they remind us amid diversities of knowledge and of gifts to be one in desire and affection, and devotion to thy holy will. May they also remind us of the value of comradeship, of doing and sharing alike. May we cherish friendship as one of thy most precious gifts. May we not let awareness of another's talents discourage us or sully our relationship, but may we realize that whatever we can do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to do thy work in this world.
Carla! Happy Flower Communion! Well, would you look at this? That's so sweet! Flower Communion, it must be for Flower Communion.
Always be home, and everyone you meet, be messengers of peace.
Hi, my name is Diane Vanderdoes. I'm getting ready to take these beautiful peonies from my mother's yard over to my neighbor Gretchen Odell. They are, I think, the color of hope.
Just say hi!
Always be home, and everyone you meet.
What are you doing here?
I'm giving you a communion flower.
Oh, I read about that! Oh, my name.
And your heart ever be true. Moving grace.
These are the flowers that were delivered to my doorstep today. Thank you so much for bringing me joy and beauty.
Here are my beautiful flowers from Eleanor and Lynn.
Thank you for the flowers. I actually gave them to my neighbor, an older couple who I think have some health problems that are even more challenging than my own.
In all of the many ways that we celebrated our flower communion this year, the through line remains this chance to offer this blessing, this beauty as a way to acknowledge and affirm our connections, our interdependence that persists through it all. To say to ourselves, to each other, to the world, nothing will undo the thread that connects us. This thread of hope and commitment, this duty that we have to one another, this duty to work for a world where we all thrive. And to offer each other a reminder that though we may be physically separated, we are not alone. We are connected in community here and now, and we are connected to a long line of people who offered each other a blessing of beauty. Even in the midst of uncertainty, people committed to drawing a circle wider and wider still until it was a circle where we are all free. And we are connected in a tradition started by a minister who so believed in each person's inherent worth and beauty, he was willing to risk his own life. And just as importantly, a minister whose affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of every person was such a threat to the forces of fascism and anti-Semitism, such a threat to evil, that they decided it had to be stopped with his death. But of course, it didn't stop. Nearly 100 years after Chopek's first flower communion, we are here today freely choosing to join together across our differences, drawing a circle of freedom for all, innovating once again to meet the challenges of our time, seeing not burden but beauty in each other across all of our differences, and continuing to pass this beauty on as a blessing. So let us circle around once more for freedom, for peace, and for all of our release. We celebrate and honor flower communion together.